A military coup in Myanmar. Soldiers detain democratically elected leaders and say they're taking charge for a year. World leaders are condemning the power grab. But what can be done to return the country to the path of democracy? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Myanmar's 10-year journey to democracy appears to be over. The military has launched a coup, saying it's taking control for a year. Soldiers detained the head of government, Aung San Suu Kyi, and leaders of her National League for Democracy Party, or NLD. They won a landslide in an election in November. But the army insists without evidence there was widespread fraud. World leaders have condemned the events as an assault on democracy. The NLD is urging supporters to protest and resist. Scott Heidler reports.
Myanmar was supposed to mark an exercise in democracy on Monday, but instead, the military rounded up the nation's democratically elected leadership, including Aung San Suu Kyi. It then announced a coup on military-run TV.
The state of emergency is in effect nationwide, and the duration of the state of emergency is set to 1 year.
Military Chief Min Aung Hlaing now rules the country. Monday was to be the first session of a new parliament after Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy, won a landslide victory in November. Recently, the army made accusations of election fraud, and tension between the civilian government and the military increased last week when a general refused to rule out the possibility of a coup. Like this member of parliament, NLD leaders and military critics were taken into detention before dawn. There's a growing list of nations expressing concern over the situation in Myanmar, as well as the United Nations. The U.S. State Department has called on the military to release all those who have been detained. Australia's Prime Minister says his country is keeping a close watch.
Well, these are rather disturbing developments. I'm aware of those troubling reports, and the Foreign Minister has been following them.
The banks in Myanmar have shut due to poor internet connection, and not knowing what might come next, people are stocking up on supplies. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera.
One of the few Western journalists in Myanmar, Ali Phao, gave us this update from Yangon.
From around 4 in the morning, the phone connection was cut off there. So for the first few hours of this, it was really unclear what was going on, which was incredibly unnerving. Lots of people, lots of rumors, lots of people worrying about what's going on. We're now hearing that mostly the people who have been detained are being detained within their own homes or their own compound. Sorry, the MPs, for example, all stay in one big compound together, so it's reasonably easy to keep them detained and rounded up, but it seems that they're still able to communicate, so there is some information coming out from them. Under the Constitution, you can hand power to the military in a state during a time of state emergency or a national emergency, but the president has to allow that. So what's happened is that the president has been arrested in the early hours of the morning, and the vice president, who is a military nominee, has become acting president, and then he has put that clause of the Constitution into effect. He's handed over power to the military leader, saying that it's legal. But of course, that first step, the key step of taking the president out of power, it doesn't seem to have any legal basis.
Let's take a closer look at Myanmar's history. The military seized power in a coup for the first time in 1962. That's 15 years after the country gained independence from Britain. Aung San Suu Kyi came to prominence in 1988 when the military cracked down on pro-democracy protesters, killing hundreds. The following year, Suu Kyi was put under house arrest. In 2010, Myanmar said it would be running elections for the first time in 20 years. And 6 years later, the military handed power to the first civilian government. Suu Kyi became de facto leader. Her NLD party won last November's elections by a landslide. The military, as we heard, says that vote was fraudulent. All right, let's speak now to Tom Andrews, the UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar. Tom, thanks for being with us. I want to ask you if you have been able to speak with any members of the government, either civilian or military, since the coup happened, what you've heard, and how concerned you are about the situation.
Well, one of the biggest concerns, Mohammed, is that communication with those inside is very difficult to impossible. We've had some communications with some of our contacts and allies on the ground. Things are obviously, people are afraid. There's a lot of fear. ATM machines have been shut down. People just are terrified as to what is going to happen next. But communication has been extremely difficult. We don't know so much because by design, the military wants to make sure that the world knows as little as possible. So we're all dealing with this this big challenge. But right now, it's very clear that something very horrible has happened. An outrageous assault on a developing democracy has gone on. There's no justification for this whatsoever. The so-called state of emergency, well, the emergency is the military itself. And it is extremely important that their actions be condemned unequivocally in very strong terms by the international community, and that action be taken, that options for action be identified immediately, and that to the extent possible, the international community has to act in a coordinated fashion. The people of Myanmar feel very isolated right now because of the communication cutoff.
Tom, when we're talking about the situation in Myanmar, we're talking about a country where there are several different ethnic conflicts that are going on in various parts of the country. With this coup that's happened now, how much could this destabilize an already deteriorating situation, and how concerned about how much this could potentially destabilize the region?
Well, clearly, there's great danger in what's going on right now. The military has had very little accountability. And the kind of pressure that is required placed on them already to this point. As you know, the Constitution that they just overturned is one that they wrote, and it gives them enormous power. And of course, just 24 hours ago, they were saying that they were going to respect the Constitution. So they've thrown all of that to the wayside. They have complete control and power. And anybody who is vulnerable, the members of the Rohingya community in Rakhine State, for example, are very vulnerable right now. Those ethnic communities throughout the country that are living in very volatile regions, conflict regions, they are obviously very, very vulnerable. So what is clear right now is that the international community has to be very clear, very strong, very unequivocal with what's gone on. This has to be condemned in uncertain terms. And frankly, those who believe in democracy and are working for human rights and democracy in Myanmar have now either been arrested or detained or are unable to take action whatsoever. So what they need, what is imperative, is a strong international response, and that's what I'm hoping and trusting that they'll be able to see.
Tom, the last time you and I spoke, I asked you about the fact that the predecessor in your role, the former UN rapporteur on Myanmar, Yanghee Lee, she had been barred by the officials in Myanmar from re-entering the country. And I had asked you if you had gotten assurances that you could go there. You had said that, there was this COVID situation right now, and because of the protocols involved, but you said that you felt, assured that at some point you would be able to go. What about now? Have you gotten any assurances from the military or from other government officials that you will be able to go to Myanmar?
No, there's been no assurances whatsoever. I've had no contact with the military at all, and of course we're trying to reach whoever we can reach in the country. But as you know, the pandemic has created, needless to say, enormous challenges. I have not been able to get into the country, go to the country, visit the country because of the pandemic. But I have been in communication up to this point with the government on an ongoing basis. It has been a respectful relationship. And so what that relationship is going to be going forward really is anybody's guess. What we know for a fact is that this action is illegitimate. It's an outrage. And I think right now the military needs to hear that the international community is not going to simply turn its back on the people of Myanmar. We will not sit idly by while this outrage takes place.
UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar, Tom Andrews, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Mohammed.
All right, let's bring in our guests in London. Maung Zarni is a Myanmar human rights activist and co-founder of Forces of Renewal for Southeast Asia. In Bangkok, Phil Robertson is Deputy Asia Director at Human Rights Watch. Also in London, Ronan is visiting scholar at Queen Mary University of London and author of Myanmar's Rohingya genocide. Welcome to the program. Zarni, let me start with you today. The military in Myanmar already wields so much power. Why do this now, and what is their end game?
Well, I think after 2 election cycles, the military has figured out or discovered, to their dismay, that they cannot play this democracy game with Aung San Suu Kyi and her most popular National League for Democracy anymore, because in the second election cycle that was held in 2020 in November, one day before the U.S. presidential elections were held, the verdict was so crushing that the military's proxy party, Union Solidarity and Development Party, was almost put out of business, out of existence. You know, it won only 33 seats out of 476 parliamentary seats, and whereas Suu Kyi's party took nearly 400 seats. So that crushing defeat, triggered the realization that with Suu Kyi and NLD, they could no longer play this game and win it. That is one of the explanations. There are also other explanations, such as Min Aung Hlaing has a price tag as commander-in-chief of the army that is accused of committing a genocide against Rohingya, in international legal or judicial mechanism, including universal jurisdiction case in Argentina, and also full investigation launched by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And so there's another personal reason. Min Aung Hlaing probably does not want to find himself in a similar situation as al-Bashir of Sudan, the deposed ex-general and president of Sudan, whom the ICC wants for genocide in South Sudan. So, the both personal and institutional reasons trigger this coup.
Phil, how surprised were you that this coup actually happened? I mean, there's been a lot of speculation over the past week about whether it would or would not happen. And also, how concerned are you for the safety of activists, of dissidents, of critics, of the military? And do you expect that we're going to be seeing more detentions in the days to come?
Well, I think we were very surprised. I think most people thought that this was saber rattling by the Myanmar military, that they were making threats to gain greater leverage over the civilian National League for Democracy, but that they wouldn't go through with it, just because the damage would be so heavy on not only Myanmar's international reputation, but also quite possibly their economy if economic sanctions now follow. So when I found out this morning that, in fact, the coup had taken place, I was really, to be honest, quite shocked. But I think you've put your finger on one of our major concerns right from the beginning, is that we've had a large number of not only National League for Democracy people arrested, but also civil society activists, democracy activists, people from other parties who the who the military considers to be activists who might then sort of spark some sort of larger uprising or protests against them. And we're concerned that these people have been taken away. We don't know where they're being held. There's concerns about abuses in custody. There's also concerns that we are going to see retaliation against critics of the military who have used the last 10 years of quasi-democracy to speak out against the military, and that these people may be on a list and may be rounded up. That there's a lot of human rights risks connected to this military coup beyond the full-on assault against democracy and the Myanmar people's choice of who they wanted to lead them.
Ronan, you heard a moment ago, Zarni was talking about General Min Aung Hlaing, and he was saying that perhaps he's the architect, actually, of this coup. I want to ask you, is the fact that he, as military chief, was expected to retire this summer, how much has that played into this? I mean, was he concerned about what would happen to him after he would have to step aside due to age restrictions?
Well, I think he probably should have been concerned about what would happen to him once he steps aside. I mean, he deserves to be in an international court. But I think his bigger issue was he had no plan for what he would do once he was pushed out of the military at the age of 65. This is someone who has grandiose visions about their own role in Myanmar and their ability to contribute to the country. This is someone who comes from a military tradition in Myanmar where it's very much winner takes all. This is not a military that's really ever had civilian oversight to any degree. This is a military that's been a law unto itself for decades, and it has a rich history of megalomaniac military leaders launching coups and holding on to power for decades, aggressively and violently and ruthlessly. And I think part of the surprise for us, maybe as outsiders, is that we assumed Min Aung Hlaing would act what we, in a way, we would consider sort of rationally, that it looked like he had things pretty well. He was getting pretty much everything the military wanted to achieve in terms of policy. And the flack was the blame for bad decisions was accumulating to Aung San Suu Kyi. But what I think the point we've missed is that he comes from a military tradition where when you make a decision, you get everything your own way. And that's the sort of leadership that he wants for Myanmar. This doesn't look like it's going to be a one-year military administration. It looks like they're betting in for the long term.
Zarni, the National League for Democracy said that Aung San Suu Kyi is calling on the public not to accept the coup and is calling on the public to protest. Do you think we will see people in Myanmar take to the streets?
I very much doubt that we will see the repeat of previous waves of, nationwide uprisings, as a result of the coup. I think the Burmese people have known how trigger-happy and brutal the military regime is. I lived under them for 25 years. I was born 1 year after the coup in 1962, and I think despite the commercial and social opening, one thing that the international community has allowed itself to be fooled is this so-called democratic transition. The fact is, the Burmese military has never, ever compromised, that never relinquished their control over key levers of the state. We have a situation in Burma where the state has been captured over the last 58 years by the military. The military intends to backseat drive the coup. Contrary to all the condemnations, I very much oppose the coup here, for the record, but the coup has been made preemptively legal and constitutional in the 2008 military's constitution, which is the framework for democratization. So the international community first held its nose when the military say we are moving towards democratic transition. So the West and the rest, go along with this big lie that Burma is moving in a democratic transition with Suu Kyi as the leader. And then second, the world continues to hold its nose when the very military forge ahead with waves of genocidal attacks against Muslim Rohingyas. And now the military is also attacking viciously the Karens and other national minorities. How can we possibly empirically and intellectually and morally as well call a political system and a regime that commits genocide, that
Zarni
writes itself as the arbiter of democracy, in the Constitution.
Zarni, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
I want to get back to that point with you in a minute, but I also want to give Phil a chance to respond to that as well. Phil, you heard Zarni talking about the fact that there have been these allegations by many international bodies and countries against Myanmar's military, saying that they perpetrated a coup against the Rohingya. Do you think you will see more countries now making a genocide determination? Do you think that more countries will want to hold Myanmar's military to account for the atrocities that were committed against the Rohingya?
I think that it's entirely possible that we will see that, and we're looking very closely to see what Secretary of State Tony Blinken does in Washington. If there is, in fact, that kind of determination by the U.S., which at the time did hire a group to do research with the Rohingya in the refugee camps in 2017. So they've got all the raw data. They've actually got a detailed report. They just refused under the Trump administration to make a determination of what actually happened, to either call it a genocide or call it crimes against humanity or whether they're going to call it. They just refused to do that. And now we're looking at a situation where, the situation is aligned where there's going to be a premium placed on levers to provide pressure on the Myanmar military. And I think that we will see certainly a review of some of those designations, or the reluctance to designate, to actually step forward and say, okay, based on the facts, this is what we really see, and this is what it should be called. So I think that you're going to see more concerted pressure against the Myanmar military. You're going to see Myanmar sort of going back to an international pariah status. It's very possible that we will see global Magnitsky sanctions brought against various different military leaders. And it's very possible that we may see a return to military economic sanctions, particularly looking at military businesses, the sort of work that the group Justice for Myanmar has been doing to reveal who is doing business with the military, I think is something that the international community needs to look at very closely.
Ronan, we've talked in the last few minutes about the actions the countries that have condemned this coup may take against the military in Myanmar. I want to talk about one of Myanmar's chief protectors, namely China. China and Myanmar have strong trade and political ties. China, of course, has really allowed Myanmar's military to get away with a lot of what they've gotten away with the past few years. Is Myanmar going to be needing Beijing's continued economic support going forward? And do you believe that China may have been tipped off in any way that this was coming? I mean, would they have had to sign off to this coup?
Well, unquestionably, Myanmar will need China's economic support, but they're going to need China's political support. I mean, China's a key protector of Myanmar within the UN Security Council, and that will need, from the military's point of view in Myanmar, that will need to be continued. But China always extracts a very high price for its protection. China's not an international player that simply does things for no reason. It's a realist, and it will demand concessions from the military, and quite likely the sorts of concessions in terms of dam building and other infrastructure that suits China's interests that may have been politically unpopular within Myanmar, and that will. China will expect that to be those sorts of decisions to be made fairly soon. In terms of whether China was tipped off, I'd be surprised if China was given a say in whether or not the coup would occur, because I think China would have to be very frustrated with the military. I mean, I think China was probably feeling that things in Myanmar, in terms of its infrastructure, were heading in the right direction from its point of view, and they were able to achieve their infrastructure demands without the sorts of scrutiny that will now be applied. I mean, it's going to be very difficult now, I think, for China to be seen as anything other than defending, once again, a pariah state in Myanmar.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you so much to all our guests, Maung Zarni, Phil Robertson, and Ronan Lee. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed, Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.